All right, we'll go ahead and get started. It's 7 o'clock. Mrs. Hoffman, will you please take roll?
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Mr. Cahill?
Here.
Miss Kyle? Here. Mr. Skidmore? Here. Miss Sedkamp?
Here.
Miss Cahill?
Here.
Mr. Meyer? Miss Skidmore?
Here.
Miss Pitts? Here. Mr. Nicely? Miss Reckers?
Here.
Mr. Hermes?
Here.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Gatlin, you want to get started with legislation?
First, for the special meeting tonight, we have the pet hotel ordinance second reading. This is an ordinance amending the Erlanger zoning ordinance, adding pet hotels as a conditional use within the NC neighborhood commercial zone. By summary, this merely is adding pet hotels as a conditionally permitted use within the neighborhood commercial zone to the Erlanger zoning ordinance on the following basis. One, that the proposed text amendment is authorized pursuant to KRS 100.203. Two, that the proposed text amendment is consistent with the purpose of the NC zone. Three, that the proposed text amendment is reasonable. Pet hotels are similar in scale and intensity as other current uses within the NC zone. Four, that the proposed text amendment will not have an adverse effect on the public health, safety, or welfare, nor be injurious to the public residing in or moving through the area. And five, based upon the testimony presented at the public hearing on January 10th, 2019 at the Kenton County Planning Commission, this was recommended by both PDS staff as well as the Kenton County Planning Commission. This is a second reading.
Do I entertain a motion that we adopt the ordinance as read? Mr. Burke, second by Mrs. Reckers. Roll call vote, please.
Miss Skidmore?
No.
Miss Kyle?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Nicely? Miss Cahill?
Yes.
Miss Pitts?
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Reckers?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Skidmore? Miss Sedkamp?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cahill?
Okay. The ordinance passes. Next legislation.
Yes, we also have another text amendment. It's an ordinance amending the Erlanger zoning ordinance, adding tattoo parlors as a conditional use within the NC zone. This also was recommended by the Kenton County Planning Commission and reviewed by the PDS staff, which recommended it. There was public testimony at a public hearing on January 10th, 2019. This text amendment adds tattoo parlors as a conditionally permitted use within the NC neighborhood commercial zone to the Erlanger zoning ordinance. On the following basis it was recommended. One is the proposed text amendment is authorized by KRS 100.203. Two, the proposed text amendment is consistent with the purpose of the NC zone. Three, the proposed text amendment is reasonable. Tattoo parlors are similar in scale and intensity as other current uses within the NC zone. Four, that the proposed text amendment will not have an adverse effect on the public health, safety, or welfare, nor be injurious to the public residing in or moving through the area. This also is a second reading.
Okay. Is there a motion that we adopt this ordinance as presented? Mrs. Sedkamp, a second. Mrs. Reckers, roll call vote, please.
Miss Kyle?
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Skidmore?
No.
Mr. Cahill? Miss Sedkamp?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Skidmore? Mr. Hermes?
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Reckers?
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Pitts?
Yes, ma'am.
Miss Cahill?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Nicely? Mr. Burke?
Okay. Ordinance passes. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Reckers, second by Mrs. Pitts. All in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned. Now we'll go ahead and open up the council committee meeting. We will begin. The first item on the agenda is the Hillwood parking issue. Mr. Hermes, you're the one that put that on the agenda. Would you like to speak about it?
Mr. Kramer, would you feel comfortable addressing the issue?
I can answer any questions that you guys have. I've sent out what the residents gave out last meeting to everybody in its entirety. I also provided Mr. Harrell's application for a handicap parking spot. And then I gave the recommendation from the Public Works Department and my recommendation all on email. Like I said, I can elaborate on any of it. I have had conversations with Victoria on the phone. Our staff has talked to Mr. Harrell. A few different people have, just to kind of understand everybody's viewpoints. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, I understand the problem, but I too requested that we have this meeting so that the citizens could hear what the problems were. One of the problems is, and I think Mr. Kramer addressed this in his email, is that Kenton County Schools next year is planning, or is that this year, not going down any streets that are less than a quarter of a mile long. Is that for next year or this year? Or?
That's the current regulation.
Okay.
But
they do it anyway.
Correct.
Yeah.
They haven't been enforcing it like they should.
Okay.
After talking to the bus garage, the directors there,
So if they enforce that, no matter what we decide, we're pretty well done. But
Right.
my questions were, what about garbage trucks if parking is allowed? Have we had any complaints from the garbage company? No?
None-
And
none
then
that
I
I
know
know.
with the plows, we have made a citywide ordinance, no parking during snow emergencies. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Then when someone applies for a handicap parking space, do they have to bring notification from a doctor, or do they just, if they have a placard, do they bring that in? How does that work?
So we've been doing it we haven't done it in a long time. So that's one of the things that Public Works and I have discussed, that they're going to lay out a procedure. What they are doing is they fill out an application, which we do have an application on file by ordinance that they must fill out. They filled that out and provided any documentation that they wanted. Mr. Harrell provided a few pages of written documentation of why he thinks it was justified. And then Public Works will go out, do a site visit. They talk to the resident about this particular one and why they should or shouldn't get the parking spot. They haven't given me an official summary of what their findings are. I do believe it's leaning towards denying that request. But, you know, again, it's
I was going to
a
say,
little
I remember
premature.
a few years ago, I believe it was Fairwood Drive. There was a gentleman there that applied for handicap, and several neighbors complained to me saying that he really wasn't handicapped. And I'm thinking, okay, so yeah, we really need to check that out. And I know we had discussed this before in council years ago. I mean, I don't know how many cul-de-sacs we have, but at that time, we decided not to outlaw parking because in some neighborhoods, they don't have off-street parking in some of the houses. Believe it or not, some houses don't have a garage or a driveway in a cul-de-sac, which is unbelievable to me, but that does occur. And so we decided we would do it cul-de-sac by cul-de-sac.
Yeah, we've got 6 in the city, that I believe about 6 that are no parking due to their size. If this one, the one on Hillwood actually, it's in line with the standard
The standard.
of today, which is pretty large, I guess, for a cul-de-sac in the city.
And the
Average
school
size for
buses had no problems before going
Well-
down until they encountered people parking, and they're not allowed to back up. I know.
Even without parking, it's still
Still
tight
hard.
for school buses, which is why I called the bus garage, just to see, I mean, I'm familiar with that street, and it's tight regardless. And they agreed, and that's one thing that they were talking about, is that they're going to start looking more into their policy, which is that street would not be authorized in their policy. And they led me to believe, they didn't say it, but that next year they were going to start enforcing that a little more
See,
strictly.
I just think that's terrible that they would do that because, you know, as parents, you know, we're so concerned about the safety of our children today. Anything can happen. I mean, I guess the only solution is drive them to the corner, and that's inconvenient for a lot of parents.
Well, it's a liability issue on their end, and that's what their concern was, is taking the large buses down some of these smaller streets. You know, the liability for them goes up from hitting other vehicles, if
Right.
not pedestrians.
Right, well, yeah, and you have that on county roads out in the country too. You have the same problem that if they're not provided a place to turn,
Right.
then they don't come down that street. Because I know in Florence, my sister had to take her kids to school because the bus could not turn around. There was no place to turn, and they didn't even have the cul-de-sac. So I just wanted everybody to be aware that we really feel for you all, but I don't know that there's a whole lot that we can do if Canton County's not even going to go down the street next year. So that was the only thing I had. I just feel sorry for these people that there's nothing we can do, really.
Yeah, it might be a temporary fix if we do.
Right, if
If you
we
guys
say
do
no
decide to
parking,
take no
yeah.
parking in that area,
Just be for a time.
we don't know for sure. I mean, they didn't give me a definite, but just, like I said, from what I was listening to them, it seems like that's the direction they were going to go next year. So,
Did they ever have trouble turning around when there were no cars so they could make the turn? I know it's difficult, but yeah, seems like they would be able to make the turn.
well, I mean, they can make the turn because there's not a bunch stuck at the end of the street today, but I mean, they had used back into some of the driveways and stuff, which is obviously not ideal either.
It's not good, no.
I don't know if you're letting kids out.
I just feel sorry for these kids, I mean, on cold winter days, and of course, we have our school here, Erlanger, they walk to that school, but at one time, I don't know if they still do this, we did have parents who would actually walk the kids. They would take turns of walking the kids to school, and that might be a solution too, that if you could find somebody in the neighborhood that was willing to do that, a couple moms, you know, it doesn't have to be everybody, but the ones who can, that don't work or work at a different time, maybe that could be a solution.
Yep. Tyson, do you have something?
Which, would you mind telling me which house is applied for the parking?
It
Parking permit.
was, 158, right at the entrance on the
Yeah.
right side there of the cul-de-sac.
Okay.
He's on the side.
And I don't know why that's given us feedback, but, and the resident mentioned that it's difficult for him to park in his driveway?
That resident, you're saying, about the, who was questioning the handicap?
Yes.
He was saying that his driveway it was so skinny that when he was trying to walk on the side that he would misstep because of the drop between the concrete and the grass, is what his statement was.
I went over and took a picture of his driveway in his car and had my husband with me, and he said he couldn't park and he couldn't take his garbage can down. My husband, with one leg, offered to go over and take his garbage out for him because he can do it at our house. And he has to go on the grass, he has to pull it down the grass, and he has to yank it up a hill to get it to the whatever, and he can still do it. And this parking spot is right at the end of the cul-de-sac, which would make it almost impossible for anybody. And I forget the handicap, forget the sexual predator, forget the school buses, forget everything. I'm just totally against parking in any cul-de-sacs. For the fire, the EMS, the mailman, the postal service, the garbage man, Public Works who has snow removal, Public Works who has to clean the streets, they clean up anything. I just think forever, I live on a street that's probably as long as Graves, and I have 4 cul-de-sacs, okay? And it's terrible just to get around and turn around if you have to go up the street and turn around because I can't get in my driveway because of other issues, whatever. And there were signs up for the longest time, no parking in the cul-de-sac, and one day they were gone. They were there and they were gone. And I don't ever remember any resolution or anything being passed to not make no parking in cul-de-sacs. So I'm totally, completely against parking in cul-de-sacs for safety reasons only. Fire and EMS, police, public works, anybody that has garbage, you know, mailman, anything. I just think we shouldn't have it, and that way, then let Kenton County deal with Kenton County has to deal with. But if we tell people they can't park in them, then I just do. And then this gentleman in particular, his is just in a bad location. And like I said, he only sent a letter saying that his handwritten, that he couldn't do that. If I really wanted a handicap parking spot and I was willing to pay $100 for it, I'd get a doctor's note after doctor's note after doctor's note. And this is totally, you know, does not fit anything. Again, my husband can get in and out of this place, and he can take his garbage out, and he can do everything. And he's got one leg, one leg. So I'm just totally against parking in cul-de-sacs.
So just to jump in here, kind of like we talked about at the council meeting, I mean, if that is the will of council, and I saw lots of head nods, so I don't know if we want to do a straw poll to see what people's thoughts are on this. That would require legislation. That's something we certainly could do a first reading on in 2 weeks that would just outright ban parking in cul-de-sacs. There are certainly communities in northern Kentucky that have done that. I don't know if we surveyed, but I'm guessing half probably ban in cul-de-sacs, half probably do it on an ad hoc basis like we do here at Erlanger. But that would require an ordinance. That would require legislative action if we were going to do all of them.
I didn't realize till our council meeting that we could park in some cul-de-sacs. I thought they were always banned, but why are we parking in some cul-de-sacs? Why is it some we can and some we can't?
Because there are cul-de-sacs that are older streets that are much smaller. This is a standard Kenton County cul-de-sac that's authorized in subdivisions, new subdivisions now. That's the standard size. So the ones that are banned are the ones that are smaller in size.
So like, if it's a small cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that really doesn't have much driveway parking, they're not even allowed to park in their cul-de-sacs. Is that correct?
For the six that we know of, that we've kind of looked at is, yeah, it's too tight there, you know, to have cars
that would be the
there
only
and-
reason I would think to let somebody park in a cul-de-sac is if they didn't have driveway park. So if that's the case, I'm with Kathy. I don't think anybody should park in cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I mean, if the council is wanting to ban it in all cul-de-sacs, I mean, that's probably something we should look at just to make sure everybody knows the scope that we're talking, because there are a lot of cul-de-sacs, and to really take a look at what that impact is on the citizens, to probably have them an opportunity to come here and talk of pros and cons, the ones that are directly affected. I mean, it's easy for people at the top of the street to say yes, no parking in the cul-de-sac, but the people that live in the cul-de-sac, I think, you know, they're the ones that are directly affected. Everyone's affected if they're driving down and trying to turn around. So, I mean, there's that. But I do think it's something that we need to really see how many cul-de-sac we truly have. That wasn't in your assessment, so we haven't looked at that.
I'm looking at that cul-de-sac on Hillwood. To me, I mean, there's nothing to prevent anybody from just going down there and turning around. There's not any kind of a tree or a bush or any green area in that cul-de-sac. I can understand the cul-de-sacs that have something in there that's, I don't know why it's there, but that you have to go around, that would make it inconvenient to park, but that doesn't, I don't know, sometimes, that's better left unsaid, I'm sorry. But
I know I would certainly be, I would not be in favor of banning it in all cul-de-sacs. I think we should handle it more on an ad hoc basis.
That's why we did it when we did it, and I can't remember what year it was, but I do remember we had quite a discussion, and some people just felt like some cul-de-sacs, you know, if they didn't request no parking in their area, they weren't having a problem, then to let it lie, you know, let it go. Because as you said, there's probably pretty many of them in the city. But on this particular one, I took an interest in this, and I got on Google Maps, and I went to the man's driveway, and a car was parked in the driveway on Google Maps. There was room to get over on one side where you could get out on the concrete. So that's why I asked you if you had a doctor's note.
That's what Kathy just said.
Yeah, exactly what Kathy said, because, you know, that's just not fair. But anyway, that's why we did it years ago, because we didn't want to inconvenience everybody in case they needed parking.
Okay, I'm seeing this as two different things right now. So we have the parking situation with the Hillwood cul-de-sac. That's one issue. And then we have this other issue of ultimately what do we want to do as a city? How do we want to move forward? I'm seeing very different views. So what I think we need to do is have Public Works do an analysis on how many cul-de-sacs this would affect, how many citizens this would affect, because we want to think very hard before you take parking away from somebody in front of their house. Some people value that, so we don't want to do it abruptly. So we have some council members that feel strongly that that's the right thing. So let's figure it out.
Can we see, before Public Works does another analysis, can we see, do we have enough interest in doing that across the city to even do that? Because that's a time-intensive analysis. So if we could just do a straw poll of who would be interested in doing it citywide to see if it's worth doing an analysis. If anyone's willing to do it citywide, if you could raise your hand so I can see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 5. 4. Okay. So council can tell me what you want us to do. If you want us to do it, do the analysis on it, we can do that. But again, that's a pretty time-intensive analysis if it's not something majority of council is interested in doing.
I just personally think that we should just take it on a case-by-case basis. I think that is the only practical thing to do. Because, I mean, who are we to judge how many parking places a family needs? You know, I mean, my kids are at my house sometimes, and I've got 5 cars there. Normally, I have 1. So I just think it's silly to go through all that time and effort.
Tom?
That's just my personal opinion.
Well, and, you know, I guess to answer that too is if we're doing case-by-case basis, then we are being the judge of that. Where if we put a carte blanche across this and put it what it truly is safety issue. I mean, I've driven ambulances, I've driven fire trucks. It's hard to get down there when they have those things in there. When you start hitting people's vehicles, when you back out of driveways and emergencies, they get a little upset with you, especially when you leave. So just to be fair about that, so personal experience. But I mean, that's what we're talking about. So if we're doing case by case, we are being a judge on that. If we're doing a city across the whole way, we're kind of saying this is the standard.
Okay. Do you want to add it to next month's committee meeting and us do an analysis in the next 30 days if we can get it done in that? Is that something that you're wanting us to do? I only see 4, so I don't see it as a reason, but if that's what council wants, if a council member wants us to do the analysis, then we'll do that. It's I'll just let that go right now until someone talks to me afterwards. Our other thing here now is, do we want to do a resolution at the next council meeting to ban parking on Hillwood? So if we want to do another straw poll, if that's an ordinance that you want Jack to write up right now, or is there any more discussion that we want to talk about?
I have a question. Is there recourse if we do not honor the handicap parking spot? There's no recourse against the city by this
No,
person?
it's an application process. We'll do an analysis on it. And
I mean,
I'm sure they could.
We could not be arbitrary and capricious in how we handled it. I don't know whose question it was. But as long as we go through the process and the application process, and, you know, that's the city's ultimate judgment. And for clarification, if we are just looking at this cul-de-sac, I'm not as worried about having an ordinance. We probably would do it as a resolution or municipal order. But I think that the executive team here is wanting the will of council. I don't think they want to make a decision on this cul-de-sac. So I think a straw poll would be in order.
Tyson?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm agreeing with Mr. Gatlin in that I don't know that it's been like that in the past necessarily, that council weighs in on cul-de-sac parking or handicap parking issues. I mean, I don't think we've ever done that in the past. But on the other side of that, we've had residents who've come to us to talk to us and tell us about an issue here at our council meeting. And I certainly would want to honor their request, especially since they've taken the time out of their evenings to be here and also have taken the time to get a petition on their street, and they got 22 out of 30 residents that agreed that they should not have that parking at the end of the street. I think we should listen to that closely.
All right, if we can do a straw poll, if we do want to do any kind of legislation on no parking on Hillwood, if you're in favor of restricting parking on the cul-de-sac and the entrance to the cul-de-sac on Hillwood, if you could raise your hand. Okay, we will have that for
Yep, it's easy.
April meeting. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay. Next agenda item is Riggs Road beautification. Mr. Glenn.
On a lighter note. A lot more fun, anyway. Okay, so that's the last slide. Okay, so what I passed out to everybody and what Matt is bringing up on the screen is the Riggs Road beautification project. So what's happened over the last 8 months, pretty much since I've been here, Matt and myself have been meeting with Duke, can everybody hear me? Have been meeting with Duke Energy and on what kind of opportunities do we have to beautify Riggs Road now that we have 16 steel transmission poles installed. So they've created quite an opportunity for us to beautify this corridor. Yes. So unfortunately, what they've also done is stepped up and financially supported this beautification project as well. So, so that's, much appreciated. So basically what we have here is, on this screen, is the entire corridor starting here to the left, which is the Erlanger Road intersection, heading down to the east, down around the corridor, and that green dot at the end will be the end of our beautification project. So basically what you're seeing here is 16, the red dots represent the steel poles, transmission poles, and you'll see 16 dots, and you can see that they go from the left side of the road to the right side and kind of back and forth a little bit. The next slide is our restrictions. When it comes to doing a streetscape project along Riggs, this is the restrictions that we have. So even though that this transmission tower doesn't represent what the one on Riggs looks like, it's basically the same thing. So you have the load line. Yes,
that is not, this is a right-of-way out in the transmission. Riggs does not have this. This picture, Riggs does not have this. You don't have that on Riggs.
This is not an exact representation of the poles that are on Riggs. So meeting with Duke Energy, they provided this, not so much for a reference of what a transmission pole looks like, but up here at the top where it says wire zones, and then to the right of that where it says border zones, it's a representation of what we can plant underneath, in, and around the poles that are out there. So, which is quite restrictive, as you can see. So the wire zones are basically from a distance of 8 feet past the outermost point of the transmission line. So the lines out there have distribution lines down low and transmission lines up high. The transmission lines extend out into the roadway further than the distribution lines. So basically, from underneath there, we cannot plant anything other than shrubbery, grasses, and things like that. So if you remember one slide back, all the red dots, everything on that side of the street, we can't plant any trees. And furthermore, the border zone dictates what we can plant even at a further distance away. So basically, our transmission lines are sticking 8 feet out into Riggs Road. And then we have another 20 feet, you can see up at the top, the middle represents our transmission mains, and we have a 20 feet buffer there. So we're already sticking out 8 feet, and then we got to go another 20 feet beyond that. The road is only 25 feet. So they're dictating that no trees be planted all the way across the street, 3 feet into the property across the street, 0 trees. And then beyond that is the border zone where we're only allowed to plant trees and vegetation that grows to a height of no higher than 15 feet. So you can see it's quite restrictive. And yes?
Mr. Glenn, this depicts 3 different wire zones. Do you happen to know what KVA we're talking about for Riggs?
We're at, what, 230? We're in the middle at
okay. The 20-foot? Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
The 230 kV. So basically, it, again, creates a great challenge for what we can do to help beautify that street. And what we're trying to do is soften the hardscape of the steel poles, kind of disguise them the best we can, and just to draw your eye away from what you don't want to see to something beautiful that you do want to see. So I included this in the slide. Oh, by the way, this whole slide presentation was put together by Jim Viox's office, and Michelle's here representing that. So I do appreciate it because it was a great job. They put this together for us. But I wanted to put this out there so you kind of know what restrictions that we have against this. You know, if you're wondering why we didn't do bigger, better, more, that is why. So the next slide. That just is the text and of what I just kind of explained. Okay, so this gets to the actual streetscape. And what you're looking at here is the intersection of Riggs Road and Erlanger Road. And that's the substation gravel driveway going in. And what we have there is the little knuckle of property that we have within the right-of-way that we can do a little entrance to Riggs Road. It's a great opportunity to, you know, everything that you see, the dots, the plants and things like that are all low-lying bushes and roses and ivies and things like that. And then down the middle of that, if you can see that fine black line, that is a 4-board horse fence that kind of will help kind of divide that landscaping bed and kind of create a good division and kind of an entrance into the whole Riggs corridor. Moving to the next slide. So what we have here is pod A and pod B. So around the base of every steel pole, what we're looking to do is plant as much stuff as we can that's not going to grow up past 7 feet. And just the kind to help hide the bottom. You know, we have the rust color paint at the bottom of each pole, kind of help disguise and hide that, and just create nice interest at the base of each pole. So basically we have higher, taller grasses up against the pole, and then we come down to lower, kind of tear it down to different types of plantings, and then tear it down once more. So it's a 3-tier planting pod. And why we have 2 pods is we're going to alternate our plantings on each pole going down the street. So it's not going to be the same thing the entire corridor. We'll mix it up at every other pole. And that's the 4-board horse fence that we're going to be putting at various locations throughout the corridor as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so throughout the corridor, we have the horse fence that's going to be up at the previous slide, which was up at the intersection. About midway down the block, we have the back entrance to the school. And there we have an opportunity to put in some more horse fencing to kind of continue the same theme and scheme on down that corridor. So you can see there's going to be 3 opportunities there to do some more horse fencing. And next slide. Next slide, which is the last slide, which is down at the very opposite end of the corridor, kind of putting some black horse fencing down there to kind of create a gateway into the corridor coming from the opposite direction. So basically what I've kind of outlined is the plantings that we're going to do around the poles, the entire corridor, and what I'm calling that will be phase 1. And we're working not only with the money that Duke Energy has provided, but also with Duke Energy. They're creating a volunteer group, and tentatively we've scheduled April 22nd for them to come, and they're going to actually do all the plantings. Yeah, so the city will take their money, purchase all the plantings, and then they'll send volunteers out, and we'll work with them in planting all the landscaping around the poles, phase 1. And then depending on the money, then we'll proceed on with phase 2, which will be up there at the intersection of Erlanger Road, the knuckle right there by the transfer station. That will be phase 2. And then what we have VOX also working on will be phase 3, which is trying to do some more plantings on the opposite side of the street of the poles. So where we can maybe go back in the homeowner's property within the right-of-way and plant some smaller trees, maybe at some intersections. So we're trying to come up with another phase to really kind of finish off this whole corridor. And, you know, money-wise, I'm not sure, you know, how far what we have been given from Duke will go, but at least we'll have a whole master plan of the corridor, and that'll help us give us direction in the future. I want to introduce Bob Martin. He's Public Works employee. He's working with me on this project, and he's my liaison between all the volunteer groups and the school and everybody. He's going to be getting everything kind of scheduled, and so Bob's been a big help and going to be a real big help on getting this completed. Does anybody have any questions? Great job. Yeah.
I have a question. My husband will tell you I don't read maps very well. So this Riggs Avenue streetscape, does it take into consideration the 2 buildings behind Randy Blankenship's office that are no longer there?
They're actually tearing down 3 of those houses. And yeah, so this is conceptually, so there's some poles in those areas. And, and with, I don't know their grand plan for what they're doing with those properties, but maybe that's something that we're not going to be able to address those poles while they're redeveloping that property.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just kind of a 50,000-foot conceptual plan for that corridor. That's a specific problem that we will be addressing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Peter?
All right, well, thank you.
I just want to tell you how much I appreciate all the work that you put into this. Matt Kramer,
Yes.
the 2 of you have gone above and beyond on this project, and it shows with the work that you've showed us today. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 20 budget. Mr. Bodie.
All right, good evening. That's a tough act to follow. Appreciate you guys being here instead of in Dayton for the play-in games this evening. So we've got a lot to go over. I met with Mr. Kramer and Mayor Fetty beforehand, and they said I have the green light to talk as long as I want tonight, so we're going to be here a while. I think that's a win-win for everybody. So, no, all of you should have received from Mr. Kramer kind of the big hits, the points of interest, I guess, via email. If not, no worries, because we'll touch on those right now, and we'll go through this in pretty short order. Just kind of as a couple blanket statements, the fiscal year 20 budget, this will include COLA raises of 1.9%, and that is from the letter from the DLG that we get every year. Last year, as you recall, that was 2.1%, so that did drop to 1.9 for this year. Merit raise, it's being proposed for a 2.1%, which is roughly $180,420. So total raise for everybody, if everybody were to get the maximum raise, would be 4%. The budget contains a 2% reduction in property taxes, and that's both real and tangible, which is a total of roughly $83,000 is a decrease. There was a mention of 0.25% or 1/4% reduction in insurance premiums. That's not going to go into effect for this upcoming budget season, simply because there was a timing thing, and it hasn't been voted on, obviously. So we've got it budgeted in here, and you'll see for the 2 years out, so fiscal years 21 and 22. So we've kind of included it in that, and that's just a 1/4% reduction, which is roughly about $84,000. The fire department is adding 3 full-time members to their staff, and they're also eliminating their need for part-time employees as well. We'll kind of touch on that later as well. The police department is adding 1 full-time member, and again, we'll go over that as well. CERS rates, they've increased again by 12% as we expected, which will continue to do so for another 8 years, unless something changes. Getting into more of the departmental expenses, on page 2 for the general government expenses, there will be under the contractual services, under service fees, our Human Resource Department is including an increase in our payroll program in the amount of about $11,000. Foreclosure filing fees are expected to increase by $2,500. Under professional services, still on page 2, we've renegotiated and consolidated legal services, under Jack Gatlin for a savings of about $40,000 in retainer alone. Human Resources additions to the Care Here services are expected to increase by $17,000 this year. Text and map amendments expected to increase by $4,600. Under recruitment and retention, this is where we budget the merit raise of 2.1%. So that's for all departments, and that's going to, again, total about $180,420 roughly. It's just budgeted in this line, and that'll get absorbed into the payroll for the following year. There's also a small business incentive program that's going to increase this line also by about $50,000 as well. On page 3, materials and supplies, under technical supplies, we are continuing the SmartGov program to assist economic development, building inspections, and codes. That costs $10,000. Just FOIA, it's an open records program being researched and tracking for the increase of open records for the clerk's office. That's an additional $5,900. Equipment, on the equipment line, standing desks for office employees, new chairs for the Wickman and Rouse rooms, total cost of about $7,020. And if you're not sure what the standing desks are, it's basically what I'm doing now, just standing at the desk. I believe it's one that elevates. You can sit down or you can stand up if your legs get tired. You can sit on down. So I think we're getting 2 of those. One for our front desk clerk, and one just kind of rotates. Under our utilities is another blanket statement. We're estimating a 10%, we're increasing our utilities by 10%. That's due to the expected Duke Energy gas rate case. On page number 4, CTI expenses. Under contractual services, service agreements, there's access control enhancements to PC and copiers, which will increase the budget by $3,500. Which is actually pretty neat. You just scan your badge to your computer and it turns on. I think, do you have that now, Mr. Kramer? It's pretty nice. I don't know how well that'll work, but I forget my password all the time. So, additions to the Google apps to include records retention requirements. That's going to increase the budget by $9,200. Removal of telecom agreement and changes to the Crescendo telephone services. That's a saving of $13,000. Under telecommunications on page 5, the Verizon cell phones and internet connection devices, it's a cost increase of $11,000. Records connectivity for PD and fire to access Kenton County dispatch systems, that's needed after the dispatch merger. That's an annual cost of $8,400. Under police, under payroll on page 6, the addition of 1 new full-time investigator, that's going to increase the costs, or increase the budget by about $78,900, and that's both salary and benefits. Under contractual services, still on page 6, new cameras and cloud storage system will increase costs for about $23,000. New additional software and upgrades will increase the budget by $4,600. Under page 7, materials and supplies, they've got non-capital equipment. They're looking to purchase 2 new traffic cameras and 5 radar units, which will increase the costs of about $16,200. Fire expenses on page 8, payroll. Again, the fire department's removing their part-time and PRN staff and adding 3 full-time members. The cost increase there nets to be $40,500. That's both, again, salary and benefits. Under service agreements, new emergency reporting program, it's going to cost about $5,500. On page 9, materials and supplies, uniforms and clothing. Their bunker gear is expected to be reduced due to the elimination of their part-time staff, so there's going to be a savings there of about $10,000. Under tech supplies, the fire supplies will increase by $6,000. The EMS supplies will be reduced by $10,000. Net savings there of about $4,000. Under their grants, a grant is being applied for the replacement of their air compressor at the East Station. $27,300 increase in the budget if approved, but the city will only have to pay $1,300. Under Public Works, page 10, contractual services, they've got a few professional services that's going to increase the budget by a total of about $78,500. You can see them listed there. If not, come talk to me. There's a litany of those. Equipment rental and leasing, that's expected to decrease this year by $5,000. Parks and landscaping maintenance, such as mowing and corridor maintenance, that's a savings of $9,000. Tree removals and planting throughout the city, that will be an additional increase of $40,000. Parks and playground maintenance will increase the budget by $9,000. Mulch and green space maintenance, cost increase of about $4,500. And the landscaping for the city building expected to decrease by $14,000. There's on page 10, again, stormwater or storm sewer maintenance. In response to various drainage issues in the city, we are funding a detrimental drainage subsidy, which was created years ago. That will cost an additional $5,000. Under service agreements, the lake area aerator, it's a tough one. Management will be reduced by $8,800. Bear with me, I'm almost finished. A lot of numbers being shouted out. Bear with me. Again, on page 10, city enhancements. Creating a new line for city enhancements this year for beautification. That will cost roughly $40,000. Yeah. Contractual services. Reduction in property cleanups will save us $6,000. And as Mr. Glenn mentioned, Riggs Avenue beautification, There was a line created to add landscaping. The cost increase will be about $15,500. But again, that's a grant from Duke. On page 12 of your handouts, there's the 3-year projection that I mentioned. Again, our estimates are fairly conservative. The CRS, again, increases 12% each year, each of those additional 2 years. And then 0.25% reduction in insurance premiums is there for the fiscal years 21 and 22 as well. Page 13 of your handout is their capital fund statement. And then on pages 14 to 15 are all the capital expenditures and purchases that everybody's looking to buy this year. And then pages 16 and 17 are the remaining 2 funds, the Employee Health Fund and the Police Forfeiture Fund, for you to glance at your leisure. That's all I've got, unless you've got any questions. Shady job. Gosh. I will work on this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? All right. Thank you so much, Steve. You've done a fantastic job once again.
So moving forward, if you guys do have any questions throughout the next month, please get with us. We will prepare the ordinance for May for first reading for a vote in June. So if there are any changes, which there might be, over the next month or so, we'll let you know, and I'll send out any changes so you're aware. It's not that we're sliding anything in there, but there'll probably be some minor changes. And if there's any questions, we might bring it up again at the committee meeting next month if anybody thinks of anything after this briefing. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is Z21 proposed zone changes. Emmy and Dennis Gordon, please.
The green button there.
Got it.
Right.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. For the record, I'm Dennis Gordon, Executive Director of PDS, here this evening with a couple of brief updates for you. I want you to be aware of several projects that are being pursued by your planning staff. And second, I want you to understand what staff's accomplished on the Z21 initiative since we were here last. I recognize that to some of you, my use of the phrase your planning staff may sound a little bit foreign. After all, we're not direct city employees of Erlanger. We are, however, staff to the 20 local governments in Kenton County, including Erlanger, and are proud to be so. The Kentucky General Assembly gave us that designation back during its 1960 session. House Bill 450 gave Kenton County and its numerous cities the ability to pursue a more efficient planning operation. You see, Kenton County had 11 planning commissions at that time. By 1966, those 11 planning commissions agreed to merge and to form the Kenton County Planning Commission, which we've served since then. Subsequent actions by the General Assembly authorized us to enter into agreements with cities and the county for administration of a joint code enforcement program, staff support to local boards of adjustment, inspection responsibilities for public works departments, and administration of the Kentucky Building Code and the Kentucky Residential Code. Today, 59 years after the General Assembly's initial action, PDS provides Kenton County and its 19 municipalities with a full range of services that are illustrated on this handout, which you have before you tonight. and then grouped into 4 service areas within the staff that are classified as community planning, general governmental services, GIS mapping and analysis, and the one-stop shop program. Before we get into community planning, and that's where Z21 is being pursued, I want to note several other initiatives you may want to keep on your radar screens. In general governmental services, I call your attention to the fact that our flagship website, pdskc.org, houses our OpenGov portal. Here you'll find our budget, both revenues and expenditures, and a number of analytics from our annual work program. It's our position that showing how we receive and spend money is only half the story. We want you to understand what we accomplished with that money, and that's what OpenGov is about. Unless you're familiar already with all the services that PDS provides, I guarantee you're going to learn something about the organization there. In GIS administration, I call your attention to the fact that linkgis.org now serves up aerial photos taken just last spring. These are the most current images that anybody has of Kenton County and obviously of Erlanger as well. There's a slider tool on that website as well. And if you, perhaps some of you longer-term citizens, you can take that slider tool and you can slide it backwards and it'll go back in time and show you photographs of the very same property back into the 1960s, and then you can slide it to the right and it'll take you and show you clear up to the point where the aerial photos were taken last spring. It's a real interesting interaction with those maps, and I think you'd enjoy seeing it. From our one-stop shop program, I want to point out that the Kentucky Building Code and the Kentucky Residential Code are new as of January 1st. There's a lot of different things in these codes than the ones that we've administered for the last 5 years. I'm sure that Mark Stewart has probably told you about those, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that this evening. In closing, I want to return to my initial point, that we're your planning staff, as surely as if we were a direct part of your city payroll, and we're here to serve. All it takes is a call, and we'll be ready and willing and able to sit down at the table and talk about it. Thanks for your attention. We're going to be back from time to time. This is an initiative that we're starting with these Z21 visits to keep all 20 of our legislative bodies up to date of what we're doing for them. Now back to our community planning program. I'm proud to report that we've got a lot accomplished since the last time we were here. And to bring that to you is someone who works on it a whole lot more than I do and can certainly get into the details a lot better than I can. So I'll introduce Emmy Randall, who is your Planning and Zoning Director, and we'll take whatever questions you have at the end of that.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you again for having us this evening. I believe I was here roughly this time last year and gave a presentation at the conclusion of phase 1 of this project. So I'd like to update you all tonight on the progress that we've made on this and where we're headed next. I'll remind you that this project really got its genesis from the countywide comprehensive plan that was updated in 2014, Direction 2030. Throughout that process, we did a lot of public engagement with all the elected officials in the county, with a lot of the citizens in the county, and as a result of that public engagement, the plan mentions over 100 times the need to update local regulations, streamline policies, repeated language that really speaks to the heart of what this project is all about. So just want to point that out. That's kind of where this is stemming from, and we've been working toward pursuing that project ever since the comprehensive plan was adopted. Now imagine for a moment you walk into Planning and Development Services to stop by and find out what needs to be done if you're a local business owner, for example, to meet local zoning regulations. This is quite literally what you encounter when you walk in. We have 20 voluminous ordinances across Kenton County that are, for the most part, outdated and based off of 1980s models. They've been amended numerous times over the years, so you get slight variations from, from city to city. You could literally have one regulation on one side of the street and something different on the other, just based on how all of our jurisdictions are so close-knit physically in Kenton County. Now, as I mentioned, we completed phase 1 last year. This is a 3-phase project. So the first phase that was completed was a professional audit of all the zoning ordinances in the participating jurisdictions, of which we have 13 that are participating. So that was completed around this time last year. The current phase, which is phase 2, is the process to develop what we're calling a blueprint code. So this is a master document that will contain a full set of zoning regulations from which each community can choose from. And then in phase 3, the implementation phase, the communities can then utilize that blueprint document to customize it and tailor it to each individual jurisdiction. Now, the audit phase, if you all haven't seen your audit report, I'd be happy to send that out and make sure everybody has a chance to take a look at that. But the audit report did look at all the various ordinances and also looked at some of the national trends that we're seeing across the country. So this consultant took a look at the ordinances and basically determined that for the most part, they're not reflective of current development patterns that we're wanting to see in our communities. They recommended that we update the organization of the document, that we simplify the language, and that we provide for more flexibility within the regulation for creative designs and types of developments that we'd like to see. They also recommended the use of a lot of graphics and tables within the ordinance so that it makes it more user-friendly, so that a citizen can pick up the document, look at it in a table or graphic format, and more easily understand what the regulation means. So you'll see a lot of that throughout as I get into more details in the blueprint itself. So after we received those recommendations and those assessments that were handed out, we began working with that same consultant to craft what we're calling the blueprint. And again, this is a single document that contains all the necessary components of the code. So we worked with the same task force throughout both phases, which included members of your staff. Mr. Kramer was heavily involved in that process, as well as Mr. Hahn and Mr. Stewart. So they participated in a number of meetings and gave us a lot of their time and input to make sure that this document contains everything that your community would need to have in terms of regulation. So I'm going to go into just a little bit, not a ton of detail, but a little bit of detail about what the blueprint document itself looks like. So overall, the zoning ordinance blueprint document has been reorganized in terms of the content and also streamlined. Your current ordinance has 19 articles, so that's being consolidated down to 14 articles and then simplified in terms of the order. The consultants have recommended that we consolidate the over 100 different zoning districts that we have across the various communities down to 25 districts. As you can see in this a little bit hard to see on this screen, but on the left-hand side are all of the existing zoning districts, and then on the right-hand side are the recommended zoning districts. What we found was a lot of communities, and this is true in Erlanger as well, you would have very, very similar districts, like, for example, residential district R1E, and then there's an R1EE that's a slight variation of that R1E, maybe with one other use or a 2-foot difference in the setback. So what we found was communities were duplicating those same districts when those issues could have been dealt with either with use-specific standards or by allowing a little bit more flexibility within the development regulation itself. So that's how we're able to consolidate those down. Now, this slide shows an example of how the format will change. On the left-hand side, this is kind of a typical what you have in your current ordinances for the zoning district sheets. Those are typically a couple of pages long. That's been consolidated into the format that you see on the right, where each district has a purpose statement and then the dimensional standards below that. And then there are clickable links on that one sheet that take you directly over to the parking regulations for that district and the use regulations for that district. So it's going to be very user-friendly, and you can go between different sections simply by clicking links within the document. You'll notice also there's graphics. So the graphics allow you to take a development pattern within your community that you really like and to put that in as an example of the type of development that you would like to see in Erlanger. Another thing about the blueprint, the permitted uses will be a lot easier to find within the document. So under the current ordinances, if someone wants to find where they can put a particular use, for example, an office use, they would go to that page for the district, look through the list of permitted uses to see if they can find that use listed. So for this example, if you're looking for an office, you would open up the first zoning district, don't see it there, you would click into the next zoning district, look for an office, don't see it there, go to the next district, look down the long list of uses, finally, okay, there's an office. I can put an office in the neighborhood commercial zone. So within the blueprint, all of the uses will be within one table. So this table shows how the uses are on the left-hand side. You can go down that list of uses and you find office, and then you look across there, and then the top-hand side, so the top row has all of the districts. So you can see where everywhere where there's a P, that's a permitted use, and everywhere where there's a C, that's a conditional use. And then each use may have additional use-specific standards. And I mentioned before, we can use these use standards across each of the uses so that we don't have to have multiple different zoning districts to handle whether or not that use is or is not permitted. We can apply the use standards to that specific use. Those are shown in that column on the far right-hand side. So that's just an example of how this will help improve the usability of the document in the way that it can be formatted. Moving on to dimensional standards, these are things like explanations of building setbacks and how heights are measured. This is an excerpt from your current ordinance that explains a particular setback standard. So in the document, that regulation has not been changed, but it's been reformatted into a bulleted type text that's easier to read, and then it will be accompanied by a graphic to help explain what that regulation means. Design standards are also within the document that relate to character of buildings. This is something that some of your districts have now. Some of them don't have this, but this will be kind of a new option where you can pick and choose what design standards you would like to apply within various districts. Again, these will be in table format, so things like requiring window glazing, for example, in a commercial district, if you wanted to do that in one particular downtown district but not in others, you could pick and choose within this chart which design standard you want to apply and within what district. And each of those standards will have graphics, again, to help explain what they mean and how they can be implemented. Fence standards, once again, a similar kind of color-coded table. This table will display the various districts across the top, and then the types of fences that are permitted, the permitted heights, and materials are also shown within the table. And then there are graphics to explain what those materials and fence types can look like. Article 8, this is all of the natural resource and environmental standards. This contains some of the things that you currently have, which are hillside development controls, floodplain protection ordinance, but there are also some additional environmental controls that have been put into the blueprint. Erlanger can make that decision if they want to include those in the local ordinance or not. Some of the new standards are stormwater management. There's optional light, noise, and dust ordinances, those types of things. So these are some newer trends that you may want to consider. Landscaping and screening. You do have landscaping regulations now. These are a little bit more robust, and again, you can pick and choose if you want to implement, for example, requiring street trees within certain residential developments, parking lot landscaping, and those types of requirements. Again, there are graphics to help explain what these mean and what the expectation is on how these are designed. Parking and loading standards. One of the things that we heard from the audit report from the consultants is that most of the ordinances have very outdated parking regulations. What we're seeing across the country now in terms of trends is that a lot of communities are reducing the amount of parking that's required because of things like car sharing. We're seeing more people shopping online. People are spending less time in stores and doing more of that online shopping. When it comes to restaurants, we're seeing more fast casual in and out than we have in the past for sit down and people staying for long periods of time. So what we're looking at with the parking standards is overall reductions in the requirements, and then also adding some additional flexibility. One of the things that's built into this is that a developer can conduct a park, if they feel like the parking requirements are more than what they need, they can submit a parking study related to their specific business operation and say whether or not they feel like the parking requirement is above or beyond, what they need for their particular business. And then the zoning administrator can review that study and make a determination about their parking requirements. Just another, optional flexibility that's being provided for. Again, graphics are provided to help explain access management and circulation regulations. The sign regulations within this blueprint, Erlanger updated their sign regulations probably within the last year, I believe. So these are not different from what you have. They've simply been reformatted into the tables and then graphics provided to help explain the various sign types. So really more formatting and graphic changes on the signs. And then the last section of the blueprint code is the policies and procedures. Within the current ordinance, you can find policy and procedure or procedure-related information sort of all throughout. So we've taken all of those procedures and put them into one article so that someone can go to that one article and see, okay, here's how I get through a Board of Adjustment from start to finish, and here's what a text amendment process looks like, and it's all being streamlined into one place. So we are currently wrapping up Phase 2. Myself, along with several staff members, have spent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours going through the final draft of this blueprint. We are still doing that currently. As you can imagine, a document this large, we're kind of going back and forth between the definitions and making sure that recent development proposals that we've seen come through, that we can analyze them under this ordinance and it makes sense and it's clear. So we're still tweaking that final draft. That final draft will go back to the consultant for final formatting and review before we get it back. So we're hoping to have this blueprint done within the next month to 2 months. And then we're working on Phase 3, which will be tailoring the blueprint for each individual jurisdiction. So some of the things that we're doing now, we're going out and doing similar presentations with each one of the jurisdictions. Want to answer any questions that you have about this process and kind of get your feedback on on the next steps and moving forward. One of the things that we are hoping to accomplish is PDS providing a strategy within which we can assist multiple jurisdictions at one time in moving forward with the process of customizing this document in tandem. I think there could be benefits in working through the process in tandem with like jurisdictions. I think, as you can imagine, that process of going through the regulations, something may come up that's unclear, or that a community has a desire for something, and another community may feel the same way. So we think there may be value in not necessarily working together, but working in tandem through that customizing process. So we're currently outlining what that might look like and how we can best move forward with the most jurisdictions at one time to get the document customized and ready to be adopted. One of the things we would like for your council to consider is what decision makers need to be working with us through that process, who can make those decisions about all of those customized tables, where the X's and P's and C's go, who needs to be at the table for those conversations. So we ask that you start thinking about that. We'll be convening the task force again to talk through the Phase 3 strategy once we have the final document ready to go. And that concludes my remarks. I will be happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. No questions?
I guess not.
Okay.
You're amazing.
That was easy.
And Dave Hahn, we'll get together and figure out how to move forward, and we'll talk to you about next steps. Okay, thank you. Okay, last item on the agenda is reduction in the size of city council. Mr. Hermes.
Mayor, would it be okay for me to approach the lectern? Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak with you. I guess first I would like to start off by saying I've had some conversations with Mr. Gatlin about this, and certainly the intention would be to move forward should council decide to in the proper legal manner. But ultimately, what I would like to do is for this council to discuss maybe an alternate number of council members, and if we can agree on that, then to put that on the ballot for ultimately the people of Erlanger to decide if they want to keep 12 council members or reduce the size. So this evening, I intend to have a respectful discussion about the size of our council. I'll listen to other council members on their impressions of the benefits of 12 council members. I'll share my thoughts on reducing that number. I plan to share my logic and data on how I have arrived at this position. In turn, I hope you'll feel comfortable articulating your opinions on the topic this evening. During the course of 2 elections, I've knocked on thousands of doors, stood on doorsteps, spoken with the people across our community. Since 2014, I've spoken to our business leaders, hundreds of other elected officials, hundreds of city workers, both inside Erlanger and out of it, as well as the staff of dedicated employees of the Kentucky League of Cities. Thousands upon thousands of interactions. The number one question I've been asked is whether I'm a Democrat or a Republican. The number 2 most popular question has been regarding Erlanger's 12-person council. It usually revolves around a question of how do you get anything done, or how big is Erlanger? but I'm always asked why. Why do you have a 12-person council in Erlanger? Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that question. My best answer is that's just the way it's always been. And that's not a good answer, in my opinion. It's true that the KRS 83A 030 number 1 allows for a city to have a maximum of 12 council members. Of the 419 cities in Kentucky, the vast majority I've researched consist of a 4 or 6-person council. Let's see, here we go. So here's a pie chart just showing there's a laser pointer on here, isn't there? Oh, you can barely see it here, but this little sliver in the top is 3 council members. This large sliver over here, and let me back up for just a second. I began to look through the different cities, and at 100 cities, I pulled the information very similar to this. At 200 cities, I pulled the information very similar to this. I'm at 231, mostly just because of lack of time and going through this. This is 5 days of research right here. There's 419 cities. I believe that if we did all 419 cities, the numbers are going to show still pretty similar to this. But 101 of those 231 cities have a 4-person council. Then there's 5-person council. Another 101 cities have a 6-person council. Then we've got some 7-person councils, 8-person council, a 9-person council, 3 12-person councils, a 15-person council, and a 26-person council. And as you know, the 15 and the 26 are Lexington and Louisville. If we look at the average number of council members across these communities, we are at 5.32 on average council members in all the cities in Kentucky. So I want to talk a little bit about increasing the economic value of the city council position. Economically speaking, all goods and services have a higher value when there's a limited supply. Quite frankly, it's easier to be elected to a 12-person city council. By reducing the number of city council members elected, we will be increasing the effort required for each member to be elected. I would even surmise that the voters of Erlanger may even spend more time vetting the candidates. If they voted for a fewer number like 6, there is no doubt there will be more work for the 6 council members. I believe the salary of the council members should increase to reflect this, but that is not the focus of the discussion this evening. If we had 6 elected council members who were actively engaged with all facets of the city operations, the value to each resident would be greatly increased. Each council member would be more clearly identified and would allow the residents to more easily hold the elected officials accountable. In the 2018 election, an off-year election, or a non-presidential year election, we had 6,270 voters in Erlanger. And this is, I'm not necessarily trying to focus on me here, I just knew that my feelings wouldn't be hurt if I put my numbers up here. We had 6,270 voters for the 12-person council, for the 12 council members. Me personally, I received 2,596 votes. I know you might say that, well, it's because most of the people don't like me, but it actually is not quite the case. I fell right about in the middle of the pack, and out of 16 candidates. And just so you have a comparison here, our top vote getter got 3,194 votes. not a whole lot different. Yeah, so that's a little over half the voters in Erlanger. Now, here's what I had found concerning, though. Those 6,270 voters cast 40,551 votes for council members of the 16 candidates. So on average, each voter voted for 6.46 council members. So people aren't voting for 12 council members anyhow. They're not vetting 12 council members. This tells me that 12 members is too many. Our voting populace is not paying attention, nor do they care who gets elected beyond 6 or 7. They simply are not vetting 16 or even 12 candidates. You see, I believe the role of city council member extends beyond showing up for the meetings and voting yes or no. City council member has the ability to be a tremendous advocate for our residents on a local level, a county level, and a state level. Their creative thinking and energetic desire for accomplishments can help keep Erlanger on the leading edge of employment practices, economic development, and public service. My recommendation would be that we reduce the size of City Council to 6 members, but I'm certainly open to your input. That's all I have to present this evening.
Is there any questions? Mrs. Kyle?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. My problem with 6 members is I've seen this happen on other council meetings. Before I was on council, I used to watch different cities. Some of them were more exciting, like Villa Hills, for example, at one time. But it seems to me that when you get 6 people, it's very easy for one particular group of people to take over and run that entire city. The beauty of having more council members is that none of us are overwhelmed. I'm sure each one of us does a different amount of work, different amount of research, but that's typical of individuals anyway, whether you have 6 or 12. But what I particularly like about the 12 members, it's not because it's always been that way, but I found out that a lot of times where there's some tough decisions to make, our decisions are not easy. Sometimes they're gut-wrenching because we want to do what's best for the citizens. And a lot of times I will do the research, think about things, and sort of come up with an idea of where I want to go. But then, when you get to a meeting and you've got 12 different people from 12 different walks of life, you know, they all have different experiences. They all have something to add, hopefully. Some of them could just sit there and do nothing, but most of the time you have some really good ideas that come up. And believe it or not, I'm not set in stone as how I'm going to vote that evening. And I think I've said this before. And I got convicted of political grandstanding, which I'm not. But, you know, if somebody brings up a valid point that I didn't think of, I'm thinking, gee, you know, I kind of didn't think about that. The other thing is, too, in Erlanger, you have a variety of people. We have all different classes, all different age groups. And the more people you have, I think the more Erlanger is represented. Whereas if you get 6 people, I just can't see that. That's just my opinion. And that's what I kind of like about the 12 members. And again, you're right, people do question, what's the value of that? But when I explain, they seem like they're okay with that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kyle. Very good points.
I didn't do a lot of data research. I've done more research over the years I've been on council. When I first started coming to the meetings before I was elected, the first thing I thought was, wow, that's a lot of people. And I watched. I came to meetings for a year before I was elected, and I watched, and it was really kind of cool to see how well everybody worked together and all the different ideas and stuff. And I remember we used to be referred to as the Big 12, and they'd say, you know, you guys really get a lot done for all those people. When I walk, sometimes people ask me, not too often, you know, why we have 12, and I'll tell them my reasons, and they seem pretty happy with it. We only make $4,000 a year. That's not much, but I don't think council should run for the money. I think they should do it for the service of their city. So I personally would rather be paid less and have more council members to share in getting ourselves out in the community. I've spoken to numerous council members from all 3 counties over the past 12, 13 years, and at meetings and just comparing, you know, from 4 councils and 6-person councils. Every single one of them I've talked to have told me, don't ever lower your numbers. They really have. They've had issues, and I'll just give you a few quotes some of them have said. Some of them that have had 6 said, we go down to tiebreakers all the time. They said, the mayor always has to do a tiebreaker, and it's 3 against 3, and it's really tough. Another council member I had talked to said that they have 6, and they live within 5 miles of each other. Like, all of them are in a 5-mile radius, so they are not representing, and their city's pretty big. They're not representing their city at all. Our current council here, we have 4 on the west side of town, 4 in the middle, and 4 on the east side. So we are like perfectly represented this time. Let's see, there was another friend of mine that was on a smaller council several years ago. It was a 4-person council and a mayor. And the mayor had 2 friends on there, and they had an agenda and everything went through, and this person eventually just stopped going because they just had this hold. And I've not seen that here, nor could you see that with 12, but she told me, she goes, it was terrible. You know, you want a larger number. Let's see, I lost my thought here. Another thing is we've had difficult decisions, and like Vicki said, sometimes we come in here not knowing which way we're going to go yet. And we do all come from different walks of life, different parts of town, different jobs, different backgrounds. And I feel like if the majority of 12 people have a solution or an answer, it's probably the right one because it's such a wide variety of people. So that's pretty much my thoughts. I just wanted to share those with you.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, that is a really good point. I think both of you have brought up really great points, and cutting down on tiebreakers is very, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen it happen here. You know, and I will say one other thing too. We don't ever struggle for a quorum. You know, we've never canceled a meeting for lack of quorum. That's another benefit. Thank you. Sure.
And you know, I think it's just people. It doesn't matter if you have 6 or if you have 12 or whatever. If you lower it to 6, you're not guaranteed you're going to have 6 workers. You might only have 3 or 4, right. And then it's going to put a strain on them. So that's just the other thing I want to make.
So I just listening to everything and looking at the pros and cons of this. I mean, it can be slower to decisions. It can be harder to get consensus with the 12. However, that also makes it harder to make mistakes. And I think I think that's what I'm hearing from everybody else is that with that much variety and that many of individuals, it's a little bit harder to get to the wrong decision, though it doesn't appear that way to some folks sometimes. So,
thank you. If you get a better feeling of it at 12, You don't want to go to 6, let's go 14. Then we'll have a better. Let's go 14 people. If we get more with the crowd, there's no business. And look at the cities that we have that's got 4 and 6. They get by great. We don't need 12. But if you come along with it, with 12 people, you get a better feeling. I'd say let's go 14 and we'll get a better feeling.
Okay, thank you.
So
I've just got a couple comments to make. One thing that maybe people aren't aware of, and this is not really off the subject, but one of the things that people probably aren't aware of is that with our 12-person council, our city clerk, Sherry, when she calls out the names on how we're voting, she never goes in the same order. So we cannot be accused of saying, oh, wow, okay, well, he voted yes, I'm going to vote yes. You don't just sit back and wait to see how somebody else is going to vote, because one of these times you're going to be the first one out of the chute. Am I correct, Sherry? So, and the other thing that I wanted to point out about a 12-member council, in 2016, I did my research. There were 6 cities in the state of Kentucky who had, at that time, 12 council members. Erlanger was down in the lower half of what we make or what we're paid. It was, well, at that time, I think we were like $3,300 is what we got for the whole year, and then that was before taxes. So I feel like that the 12 council is the right one to go, and I did my comparison on those 6 cities, and like I said, Erlanger was down toward the bottom. We don't have any tiebreakers. We don't, you know, everybody pretty much works. Everybody's got different opinions, and we act in a controlled manner, respectful manner, and we work things through. And I think to go to 6, it's going to be easier for somebody to convince other people to go their way. I think we need to stay at 12.
Okay, thank you. I would like the record to show, though, I never was saying that this is because we're following votes. It didn't have anything to do with that, or that we're paying too much. I mean, that's neither of the issues that I've brought forward.
Well, I thought we were able to talk about anything. I didn't know we just had to stick to what you said. I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Well,
not
you
saying
don't
that
have
either.
to.
But you almost made it sound like I was saying that, or maybe I just took it that way because I'm standing up here.
I just want to know why change what works. Look at other cities struggling for money. City of Erlanger? No. My opinion. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? Oh, Patty.
I understand what you're trying to say, but you look at these other cities, none of them compare to Erlanger. They don't. We are always the best of the best, and we always lead the way, and people always look to us. And they look to us because we do things right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Do we get a motion to adjourn? Kevin and Kareem. All in favor, say aye.
For what?
All right. Have a good night.